Hey, Mr. P here. In this video, we're going to talk about how forensic entomology is used and specifically talk about some application pieces or application questions that forensic entomologists often ask when looking at a body and when utilizing forensic entomology evidence or evidence associated with insects at a crime scene. So some of the ways that forensic entomology can be applied within the field of forensic science is to estimate a post-mortem interval. We often use PMI as the kind of acronym for post-mortem interval, and as we talked about in the last video, PMI has to do with calculating the amount of time it was between the individual dying and the body being discovered. Oftentimes, unless a murder was actually witnessed, there is a length of time between the actual murder and the time when the body was discovered. And so this PMI has to oftentimes be calculated from either insect activity or using things like rigor mortis, livor mortis, and the stages of decomp, which we will talk about later in this class. So forensic entomology can be applied to estimate the postmortem interval, or PMI, if a body is badly burned or if a body is found several days after death, meaning it's found post all of the rigor mortis stages. It's difficult to estimate the time of death using the body temperature, rigor mortis, or other common techniques that are applied to a really quickly found body. It often takes a while, like 24 to 36 hours for, depending on the ambient air temp, for a body to completely lose all of the body heat that it had prior to death. Rigor mortis are the stages of the way the body deals with the onset of death, and then other common techniques which we'll talk about in the class. But for now, insect activity, insect evidence, and factoring in the ambient or the environmental variables such as location, temperature, humidity, and the amount of rainfall and sunlight, it is often possible to calculate the PMI using insect activity alone. It is really, really crucial in a lot of these cases for forensic entomology to come in and calculate this PMI using the insect activity, which gives a legitimate time of death, or at least a very well calculated time of death, which will go a long ways in determining time frames and alibis and some other things that are crucial to the discovery of the evidence. So forensic entomology can accomplish the following things. One, the fact that insect activity is attracted to bodies, we can oftentimes use the presence of flies, their eggs or larvae or maggots or other insects, masses of insects, can help us actually find a body. If there's a body that is, or a person that has gone missing, and they've kind of not ruled out foul play, or they've maybe identified some other pieces of evidence that led them to believe a murder took place, going out and searching outdoor crime scenes for the presence of insect activity can oftentimes lead them to the body, just because insects are actually kind of loud. Swarming flies can make a lot of noise, and so they can help physically reveal body or remains by just being present. Another thing they can, or forensic entomology and insects themselves can help determine if the body was moved. So were the insects found on the body normally present in the environment where the body was found? If they are not, that is a good indication that the body was moved, right? If there is insects on the body that are not normally found in that area, they probably came with the body. The body was probably, or the person was probably killed in a different location and moved into this location, bringing these insects with it that aren't normally in that location. On the other side, insects that are found in and around a body can also help identify a geographic range of the crime scene based on the types of insects that are found on the body that has been moved. So if a body was moved a long distance, or in some cases maybe not so far distance, within the same state but maybe 50 miles, it can greatly impact the geographic range of a particular insect. It might pull insects out of one area and put them into another. And specific insects have specific geographic ranges that they have to stay in and survive in. And so if those insects are pulled with a body or moved with a body, it can oftentimes lead us back to the specific geographic range where those insects should be living, which can give us an indication of where the crime scene may have taken place, okay, or where that primary crime scene took place. Insect bites and insect activity can actually link a suspect to a particular crime scene or to a victim by the presence of insect evidence or bites. So if a body was discovered with insect bites and a suspect also has similar insect bites, and those bites are determined to be of the same age and from insects within the same geographic range, it can lead to circumstantial evidence that ties a victim to a particular suspect. Just like bites on a person, insects are often transferred from environment to vehicle or from vehicle to environment. And so if there are insects located on a victim or a suspect's vehicle, they can be analyzed. The actual contents of the insects can be analyzed to link suspect vehicle to a particular geographic range. They can link suspects to that car. They can then link suspects to that geographic range. They can refute alibis and just put the suspect in a place that he or she may have not readily allocated they were in. So trace the origin of drugs in drug trafficking based on insect evidence found in drug packaging. Insects are really good about eating a variety of things, and in some cases can actually consume trace amounts of drugs, which can give an indication of where the drugs came from, because again, insects have very specific geographic ranges, and so you can actually tie the manufacturing and the trafficking of drugs through specific geographic ranges based on insect activity within those geographic ranges, and possibly the contents of the stomach of a particular insect in those types of cases. So forensic entomologists interprets insect evidence, applying environmental variables to help answer questions about a dead body. So I have a variety of questions, and then I will let you know how insect activity can specifically lead us to an answer for those particular questions. So first question, where on the body are the injuries? Okay. If the body is fresh, you can look at a body and you can determine where the injury is. Is it a gunshot wound? Is it a stab wound? Is it blunt force trauma? Is it a wound to the head? Is it a wound to the chest? Okay, these are all questions that a forensic investigator needs to identify. Because flies are attracted to open wounds to lay their eggs, maggots and maggot masses can actually indicate the site of an injury. So if you came up on a body that has been deceased for a while and maggots have already colonized, or flies have already colonized the body, and there is a maggot mass, and let's say the maggot mass is this big, well, the fact that the maggot mass is on the left chest indicates that there was probably an open wound where the eggs would have been deposited, which would indicate that there was an injury, or at least an opening in this person's chest in the upper left quadrant. Okay, maggots and flies only lay their eggs in entry points to a body. So you will typically see insect colonization around the nose, the mouth, the ears, and then any kind of open wound. In this case, it could have been a gunshot wound. Okay, but the presence of flies or the presence of maggots in a maggot mass can indicate, and often does indicate, the site of an injury. Was the body moved after death? If the insects associated with the dead body differ from the insects found at the crime scene, then it's probably a pretty good indication that the body was moved. Again, we've talked about that a little bit. If the insects that are colonizing a body or that are found on the body are the same as the insects around that particular body in that particular environment, then it probably is a good indication that the body was either not moved or not moved very far. Was the victim restrained while alive? If the victim was restrained and kept restrained for a while, it could indicate that urine and fecal matter would have and should have been deposited on the body or present on the body. And so that, or the presence of urine and fecal matter, will actually attract houseflies rather than blowflies. Blowflies, as we've talked about, are the types of flies that are going to be eating flesh, whereas houseflies are not eating flesh. They're not flesh eaters. They are attracted to feces. And so if we had houseflies on the lower half of an individual's body, it could indicate that the victim was restrained for a while before death. Was the body covered, buried, or submerged in water? If so, this would greatly affect the way that insects colonize the body. There are a lot of flying insects that just physically cannot get under soil, underwater. And so if the body was covered by a lot of debris, or if the body was covered by a bunch of soil, as in being buried, or if it was submerged in water, it would, again, not attract the same level of fly activity that a body that isn't submerged would. And so, again, that can indicate kind of the presence of other things, or where the body was for the majority of the decomp. Was the deceased exposed to any toxic chemical or under the influence of any recreational drugs? That's a big indicator of possible cause of death. And so we can actually look at the insect activity, and we can actually analyze the contents of the feeding larva's stomach for human tissue. Because human tissue is often stored in the crops of the feeding larva, we can actually extract that human tissue that's being stored there, and we can analyze it for drugs and other recreational chemicals, which can oftentimes give us an indication of cause of death. So if there wasn't any kind of trauma, if there wasn't an open wound, and we wanted to identify how, or try to use insect activity to try to determine the cause of death, we can actually analyze human tissue found in those feeding larvae for drugs and other recreational chemicals, which can lead to overdose diagnoses, or just a diagnosis of that individual being under the influence. If you have questions, bring them to class. That's all I got. Bye.